900 King Street East in Stony Creek. My name is Edward Winter. I'm hosting this meeting. Panel member Jennifer Mallard will chair. Today, in addition to panel members, we have our applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and media observing. Members of the public are welcome to observe the meeting only, please. And this session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the City of Hamilton's Design Review Panel webpage. Last reminder to our panelists and speakers, reminder to keep your microphones muted while not speaking. Okay, thank you, everyone. And Jennifer, you may begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Edward, can you please reconfirm that this session is being recorded?
I confirm, yes.
And are there any changes to the agenda today?
No, there are not.
Are there any declarations of interest from panel members?
No, I have not received any.
Okay. So on the agenda today, as Edward mentioned, we're reviewing 2900 King Street East. The lead planner on the file is Daniel Barnett. Good afternoon, Daniel. We're ready for your presentation. Please keep your presentation to under 10 minutes.
Share. Good afternoon, the panel and attendants. The proposal is for a development at the lands at 2,900 King Street East, located at the southwest corner of King Street East and Centennial Parkway South. The proposal is for a mixed-use building consisting of a 6-story podium and 2 towers, one tower with a total height of 20 stories and the other with 18 stories. Total of 694 dwelling units, 356 square meters of commercial GFA, 326 vehicle parking spaces, and 288 bicycle parking spaces. So again, the subject property is located at the southeast or southwest corner of King Street West and Centennial. The proposal is located in an area dominated by low-rise single-family homes, with some areas of the proposal of the area basically including some mid-rise developments, including to the north west, and then some more more multiple dwellings, so about 8 to 9 stories located to the north east over by Village Street. This is a view of the subject property seen from King Street looking south. As you can see, it's an existing vacant property. This is a view of the subject lands as seen from Centennial looking west. This is a view of the existing vacant lands located to the south of the subject lands as seen from Centennial Parkway South looking southwest. This is a view of Battlefield Park located to the east of the subject, east and southeast of the subject property, seen from Centennial looking southeast. This is a view of Battlefield Park located at the southeast corner of King Street and Centennial, looking seen from Centennial looking east. This is existing commercial and low-rise multiple dwelling located to the northeast of the subject property, as seen from King Street East looking east. This is the existing gas station and restaurant located to the north of the subject property, seen from King Street East looking north. This is a view of the existing commercial building and then the 6-story multiple dwelling located to the northwest of the subject property, seen from King Street looking northwest. And finally, the view of the existing cemetery located immediately to the west of the subject property, as seen from King Street East looking south. So this is the proposed development for the my apologies for the proposed development with the 20-story tower located towards King Street and the 18-story tower located to the south with the 6-story podium. This is the view of the underground, the ground floor, the commercial uses located along King. This is the southern elevation of the proposed development. So this would be from the front, taken from the rear. This would be the northern elevation. This would be from along King Street. This would be the easterly elevation. So this would be from Centennial. And this would be the westerly elevation. So this would be what we've seen from the cemetery located to the west. This is a rendering of the northeast perspective from the corner of King and Centennial. This is a rendering of the southeast perspective from Centennial Parkway South. This is a rendering of the northerly perspective seen from King Street. This is a rendering of the easterly perspective seen from Centennial. This is the rendering of the northwest perspective from King Street East. The subject property is identified as being both neighborhoods along King and secondary corridor along Centennial in the Urban Hamilton official plan on Schedule E. The subject property is designated neighborhoods in the Urban Hamilton official plan, Schedule E1. The secondary corridor serves as a link between nodes and employment areas or primary corridors. Urban corridors shall function as commercial spines, providing retail and commercial services that center primarily on the weekly and daily needs of residents in the area. Neighborhood shall primarily consist of residential uses and complementary facilities that serve the services intended to serve the residents. Neighborhood elements of the urban structure shall permit and provide opportunities for a full range of housing forms, types, and tenures, including affordable housing support. The built form along the urban corridors shall generally consist of low to mid-rise forms, but will vary along the length of the corridor, with some areas permitted to accommodate high density and high rise built forms. Secondary corridors shall generally accommodate retail and mixed-use forms in small clusters along the corridor, with medium density housing located between the clusters. Secondary corridors are generally characterized in large measures by single-use buildings. The intent of the plan is to evolve the secondary corridors to an increased proportion of multiple-story mixed-use buildings in small clusters with grade retail that serves commercial uses. Neighborhoods designation policies, residential dwellings and local commercial uses are permitted in lands designated neighborhoods. Uses permitted in high-density residential areas, including multiple dwellings. The existing character of the established neighborhood and designated areas shall be maintained. Residential intensification within the area shall enhance and be compatible with the scale, character, and existing residential neighborhoods. In high-density residential areas, the permitted net residential density is between 100 units per net hectare and 200 units per net hectare. The proposed development shall provide adequate landscaping, amenity features, on-site parking, and buffering where required to be compatible with the existing and future uses in the surrounding area in terms of height, massing, and arrangement of buildings, structures, and provide adequate access to the property, designed to minimize conflict between traffic and pedestrians. The orientation, design, and massing of buildings and structures higher than 6 stories shall take into account the impact on public view corridors and the general public view of areas like the Niagara Escarpment. Residential intensification development should look at the relation of the proposed development to existing neighborhood characters so that it maintains and where possible enhances the built upon desirable established patterns, tenures. The proposed integration of the development with the surrounding area in terms of use, scale, form, and character, compatibility with the adjacent land uses, including matters such as shadowing, overlook, noise, lighting, traffic, and other nuisance effects. The relationship of the proposed building with the height, massing, and scale of nearby residential buildings, in consideration of transition in height and density to adjacent residential buildings. Urban design goals ensure that new development is compatible with and enhances the character of the existing environment and locale. Urban design policies respecting the existing character, development patterns, built form, and landscape, recognizing and protecting the cultural history of the city and its communities, recognizing that every new building or structure is part of a greater whole that contributes to the whole overall appearance and visual cohesiveness of urban fabric, respect the existing cultural and natural heritage features of the existing environment by reusing, adapting, and incorporating existing characteristics, allowing built form to evolve over time through additions and alterations that are in harmony with the existing architectural massing and style, complement the existing massing pattern, rhythm, character, color, and surrounding context. The built form policies, new development should be designed to minimize impact on neighboring buildings and public spaces by creating transition and scale to neighboring buildings, ensuring adequate privacy and sunlight to neighboring properties, and minimize the impact of shadowing and wind conditions. A new development shall be massed to respect the existing and planned street proportions. New development should define the street through consistent setbacks, building elevations. Built form shall generally conform to the pedestrian environment by locating principal facades and primary building entrance parallel to and close to the street as possible, including ample glazing on the ground floor to create visibility to and from the public sidewalk. Include a quality landscape edge along frontages where buildings are set back from the street. Locate surface parking to the side and rear of sites or buildings using design techniques such as building step backs to maximize sunlight, to pedestrian areas. So the subject property is zone C3 in the City of Hamilton zoning bylaw 05200. The C3 zoning permits a range of commercial uses but does not permit a multiple dwelling. C3 zone restricts the maximum building height to 14 meters. The parking requirements vary depending on the size of the units, with a rate of 0.3 per unit for units less than 50 square meters and 1 per unit for units greater than 50 square meters. And then based on the unit breakdown, they would need approximately 232 units, 330, about 332 units. Parking spaces are required, sorry, it says units. Amenity space is required at a rate of 4 square meters per unit for units under 50 square meters and 6 square meters for units greater than 50 square meters. In terms of specific areas of discussion, what is the relationship of the proposal to the existing neighborhood? Does it maintain and where possible enhance and build upon desirable established patterns, built form, and landscapes? Is the proposal massed to respect existing and planned street proportions? Does the proposal recognize and protect the cultural history of the city and its communities? That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Daniel. We're now ready for the consultant to provide additional information. And again, please keep the presentation to under 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, members of the panel. My name is Matt Johnston, registered professional planner with Urban Solutions. I'm joined off screen by Matt LeBlanc of our team. And we also have our architect, Roland, and Leanne, our landscape architect and urban designer on the team. Just before we get rolling, I do want to say a quick shout out for those that don't know, and it's a shame we're doing this virtually. We could have had a class of 2001 Waterloo reunion. Eldon, good to see you, buddy. And Edward Winter, the three of us were all in Waterloo together at the same time. So it's nice to be working on a project all from a different lens. So yeah, good to see you guys. And now, just to get the ball rolling, thanks to Daniel for the overview, accurately summarized the applicable policy framework, the proposal. And sorry, I do want to recognize that we're joined by our client who is on the line, Mr. Kyle Camaro. So he's here to observe as well. And what Mr. Camaro has here is really an underutilized parcel. I think we can all recognize a few attributes the site has that weren't touched on in the policy framework is we are just due south of the Confederation GO station up at the QEW and Centennial Parkway. Construction for that was just scheduled with a great announcement here in Hamilton with the premier last week. And we also have the final stop on the LRT route, also just a stone's throw to the north, all of which were sort of some of the guiding factors that helped ensure, I think, that we were on the right track with recognizing the underutilization of the current property as well as the current policy framework in terms of what its permissions are. So that led us to a formal consultation process with a similar proposal that we have here before you. And I'll turn it over to Roland now to walk through his vision in the design of the building. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Matt. I'm hoping everybody can hear me okay. Sometimes I have trouble with this microphone. Please just let me know if you have any issues. I did have a whole bunch of renders to show here, but Daniel has already shown you those. I will touch on those. I'll try not to be too long about that. As Matt and Daniel had alluded to, that the site is at the confluence of two major streets within Hamilton. King Street and Centennial are major connectors from at a macro urban scale. So it seems an appropriate place for a building of some size on the site. We do have ample green space around us, a cemetery to the west and the park to the east along Centennial. There are issues because of the nature of the two streets, which are major commuter pathways in terms of getting vehicular access onto and off of the site. So we have a right in and right out access onto the site. And those are at the two extremes of the site to try and get as far away from the intersection as possible and deal with the traffic concerns. I believe our traffic consultant did deal with those in his report that accompanies this application. What you're looking at right now is an exploded axle that tries to explain the basic bones of the development. It's relatively straightforward. It's a U-shaped podium that frames the two principal streets that we're facing, plus the elevation to the south. They surround a shared courtyard on the third level, which is on top of two levels of above grade parking. There is retail provided. You can see in the blue facing King Street. And there's two residential entryways that I'll show you, two different lobbies that serve the two different towers. We're using the rooftop of the podium as well for a secondary outdoor amenity space for the residents. So although we are building on most of the lot, almost the entire lot will be built upon, we are providing ample green space and outdoor amenity opportunities for the residents of the building. The two towers are located on the site shifted relative to each other to try and offset the views and the adjacency so they're not looking directly at each other. There is ample separation distance between the towers. I believe we exceed the 25 meters, or at least we have 25 meters. Because most of these buildings are smaller buildings fall into the sort of tower and podium framework. We're hoping for something a little bit different here. You can see this red screen that we placed around the building. We're trying to bring the building together in a more integrated fashion, the podium and the tower to be read as one building rather than three separate elements, which the plan really does break down into the two towers plus the U-shaped podium. And you'll see that in some of the renderings. So here's our site plan. As I mentioned, the vehicular access is at the two extremes of the site, right in, right out exclusively to make sure traffic flows are not interrupted. The brown area is the parking garage. So we do have two levels below grade. We have interior to the building, a parking garage, and the loading functions taken care of. Those are all internal to the building, not visible from the exterior. We do have retail along most of our King Street frontage. And we have the two principal entryways to the residential functions off of King and off of Centennial. So we have our principal residential addresses do address both principal streets. Between that, we have a series of what we typically call townhouses, but they're at-grade accessed units. They can be accessed from the corridor or directly from grade off the street. So they animate the street front. Will have small terraces, small plazas. There is a grade change happening along Centennial. And by elevating these units slightly, we can have a number of steps up to help separate them in terms of the private terrace area, the patio for each unit, and the public domain of the sidewalk and the boulevard, which we should also mention is quite broad. You can see the distance from the curb to the building is quite generous. So we have ample opportunity for lots of landscape in the boulevard to separate the traffic, noise, and activity from the residential uses, and while still offering ample visual adjacency to King Street for the retail that's provided there. So going up the building, this is the U-shaped podium, capturing the outdoor amenity space on the third level that then has a look out over the cemetery to the west. On the rooftop of the podium, ample outdoor space that both buildings can share into and access. I should mention that it's two towers because there may be an interest, there may be a desire to phase the development. So we would build the north tower facing King Street first, and then if it was necessary, the second tower might come a little bit later. And oh, sorry, I should also show that they're offset from each other, so they're not absolutely in line. There's a shift of the two towers to show that they're slightly different. This is a section through the building showing you the parking with the amenity space on top, the retail fronting onto King Street, the sort of interstitial zone between that brick facade that I mentioned that I'll show quite shortly and the towers themselves. So here's the image, which it's a relatively straightforward concept in terms of how to render this building of scale. Again, we're trying to have a singular expression for it, an integrated form between the podium and the tower rather than the typical block on top of block that a tower and podium would be. We think the idea of having this sort of interstitial zone between the brick or a precast screen, it'd probably be brick with a precast backing laid over the balconies will give an interesting read to the building from a distance. You'll get an interesting shadow effect and a depth to the facade that you would not otherwise achieve. And then the interior of the building can be quite a quite simple either window system, perhaps precast or metal panel system and metal stud. We'd have limited windows on those elements because, of course, the new building code provisions and energy strategies that we'd have to involve. The interior of the building facing the courtyard would not have the brick screen, so we just have simple continuous balconies looking into the shared space between the two buildings. So here's the view from the southeast that you saw before. We haven't managed to model the slope of Centennial in this view, but it is significant running up the hill to the south behind us. But that's one of the residential entryways that you're seeing in the center of the screen there. The rooftop terrace on top of the podium would have a full height architectural scrim around it, portion of which could be glazed to deal with wind conditions. A view from King Street showing the vehicular entryway. This is where the loading vehicles as well as passenger vehicles will come onto the site. This is all retail frontage, so ample opportunity for signage and exposure to King Street. Again, the Centennial frontage showing the residential areas and their patios in the background here, well set off from the street and a grade separation between those private terraces and the public areas. A view from the cemetery. You can't really see the shared courtyard in the background here because of the tree canopy, but that would be open and a shared space between the two towers that would look out over the cemetery, which I think would be a great amenity and also be a great view from the cemetery into our development. And just a close-up view to show some of the qualities of the kind of space we'd create, that sort of interstitial zone that you see on the balconies between the actual fabric of the building and the exterior masonry expression. This would be the rooftop terrace for the shared amenity space that could have a full height or partial height glazed screen, depending on what the wind studies tell us. And then a couple of precedents for the kind of materials that we're proposing to use and their expression. So this one very directly has this sort of outer hard masonry wrapping and the softer, more open metal system on the inside, very similar to what we're showing you here. The idea of the two different materials interacting, the precast and the brick on the right, and then a little bit of flagrant self-promotion here, a couple of our own projects that have similar qualities. This is a building in the railway lands in Toronto, Fort York neighborhood. So the idea of the brick screen that captures all the balconies and creates an appropriately scaled and textured facade to the building, and then something else again behind that. And I think I'll end there and answer any questions.
Thank you, Matt and Roland. At this time, we provide an opportunity for each of the panel members to ask questions. Please keep your panel questions to questions only, as comments will come later. And we'll start off with Dana.
Hi, thanks Matt and Daniel for your presentations. My first question is for Daniel around, the planned function of the arterial and the lesser arterial that this project is on. You mentioned it was a C3 zone, 14-meter height, but how recent is that zoning? Is that what you guys are anticipating for this area? Just you asked us to comment on context and the building fit, and I just want to understand like what the direction is for the planning in Hamilton here.
So there's a couple of things. One is the C3 zoning is part of the commercial zoning, which came into effect, I believe, if my memory serves correctly, 2017. So it's, not ancient. It's, relatively recent. There is an application, obviously, before the city right now for a zoning bylaw amendment application. So they are trying to change the zoning from the C3 to something else. Obviously, the plan context takes into consideration kind of what's existing in the area, but also what is planned for the area. And obviously, the current zoning does not show it for that zone as well as for the area does not show any, tall buildings. So, in terms of the plan context, that's kind of what I was pointing out. Basically, is that the current zoning as well as the zoning in the area does not have anything in this range of height. In terms of what is being proposed. I think the highest that I could find was about maybe 25 meters in height, whereas what's proposed here is approximately about 63 meters in height.
And is in terms of like the planning studies that are currently underway, are you guys looking at changing that, or is that what you're looking for in the future as what's kind of there?
Well, I mean, there's no secondary plan.
What's the direction?
Yeah. So
No.
at present, there's no secondary plan that kind of gets a kind of more in-depth view or of the vision. It's mostly based on the current official plan policies as well as the existing zoning direction, because as I said, most of that area is, at least for the commercial components, the residential components mostly is low-rise residential, and most of the C zones in that area are, I said, C3 or standard C5 zones, which would be, C3 would be about 14 meters and C5 would be about 22 meters, with some areas having like site specifics that maybe get you up to 25 meters. So what is kind of an established in the area through kind of existing zoning obviously is significantly lower in height than what is obviously being proposed, but it's ultimately up to council, obviously, if council wants to kind of change that zoning. But as it stands right now, based on what has been approved in this area, they said there's nothing in terms of 20-story, 63 meters in height. But
Okay.
they said that they do have an application to kind of request council to change that.
Yeah. And my other question is for the applicant, what's the floor plate size of the towers? Are they the same or?
Sorry, they're each 750 square meters roughly. Yes, they're the same. Each is the same size.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Dana. Over to Joey.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you, Daniel, Matt, and Roland for your presentation. I'm going to continue. Sorry, there's some construction happening above me. I'm going to continue Dana's questioning about the planning for the neighborhood. So my questions for Daniel. I understand that the current type of proposal exceeds what is permitted through the zoning bylaw. Are there other projects in this area that are planned that are of this scale and or height?
So at this, for the immediate area, I have not, in my kind of initial review for the rezoning application, have not found anything in the kind of immediate area. Everything's currently zoned in such a manner that would say, as I mentioned in terms of the previous question, was getting to about a height of 25 meters. I've not obviously extended my search, further beyond in terms of up to like Queenston. I mean, this particular intersection is kind of, the context is obviously much lower rise, and in about a kilometer radius, there's pretty much nothing more taller than about a 25-meter high building.
Okay. Okay. Is there, I mean, are there opportunities for this type of development to happen? Maybe just south of the property? Because right now this one sort of, I guess, on one side they're heritage properties on sort of two sides of the building, but there are opportunities south of this property to continue this type of development.
Yeah, so in terms of the south, I mean, what's to the south? Give me a second here. I mean, what's the zoning immediate to the south is under the old Hamilton bylaw is a townhouse development zone. So it's like an RT10 zone, which is like a large lot, or sorry, it's like a townhouse, like block townhouse development zone. So, sorry. I mean, so as the currently zoned, no, they would not be able to do a tower on the south. It is vacant lands, but the closer, obviously, the further south you go, the closer you get to the escarpment too.
Right.
So, but in terms
How
of
about
zoning,
along
yeah, there's
King?
nothing in the immediate area that would have zoning permissions.
How about along King, along the on the northwest side there, along that stretch?
Yeah, so basically looking what's on screen, like
Yeah.
currently, as I said, there's a 6-story building located, if you're looking at the screen to the north, yeah, right there, there's a 6-story building there kind of tucked in behind the existing 2-story commercial buildings that front onto King. And then if you were to go further to the east, kind of tucked in behind King again, there's like 8 or 9-story buildings, multiple dwellings there. And then if you go further to the west on King, I believe there's another like 8, 9-story building, probably about 500 to 800 meters further to the west, basically. So,
Okay.
I mean,
So
there
so
are
there's
multiple dwellings
opportunity
in the
there.
area, but that's the issue with multiple dwellings in that area is that they're
Okay.
mostly mid-rise.
Okay, thank you. And planning, I mean, has seen this project over the last little while. Are you generally supportive with this proposal?
We have not yet
Proposal?
released our comments to the applicant. Part of it is
Okay.
to have this meeting
Okay.
in terms of getting those comments, and then they kind of roll into our planning comments. So we have not yet released our
Okay.
comments.
Thanks, Daniel. That's everything from me.
Okay, thanks, Joey. Ted?
Thanks. So one question I have for Roland, and thanks for the presentation. What does the interim phase 1 condition look like? Has that been modeled, and that presumably that phase 2 could be delayed or never go ahead? Do we have a view of that?
No, we don't have a view of that. The expectation was that the delay would be just a matter of months for construction or marketing. The dividing line is here such that all the requisite ramps and associated infrastructure could be provided on phase 1, pending the completion of phase 2. But no, I don't have a render to show you should phase 2 be delayed unnecessarily. We haven't looked at that yet.
The outdoor amenities at roof level 7 seem to indicate that it's for residence use as well as the courtyard space, but we don't have details on either of them to any great extent. What are the plans for that, and what's the landscaping that would be part of that?
Well, we haven't programmed those yet. It would be the next phase of development when we go forward to site plan and look more closely at the marketing of the building. It is a concrete structure, so we can have significant plant material in those. It would be a mixture of passive, intensive roof areas and more active terraces with, I mean, the usual barbecue and common amenity spaces, gathering spaces for the residents of the building. That's the expectation. We're hoping that the area in the courtyard at the bottom that overlooks the cemetery could be quite active. It's related to a very large indoor space, so that spilling out and then looking to the west should be quite nice.
Thank you. The renderings seem to be advanced from what we're
Yes.
seeing in the elevation, so we should
Yeah.
believe the renderings.
Yes, please.
Okay, will do. And who's when I look at the planning mix, like the unit mix in here, it seems very homogeneous. Who's the intended market, and can you just describe who's living here? How is it condo? Is it rental? You might have mentioned it already, but if you could.
It's condo at this time, I believe. That would be a question for the owner. We haven't really gotten into the meat of how this would come to market yet. Till we get closer to that date. Obviously, they would be tailoring it to that. As it stands right now, basically it's rather heavily weighted towards one bedroom. So it's like 80% one bedroom and 20% two bedroom. That could change as we move forward.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thanks, Ted. Over to Eldon.
Thanks, Jennifer, and thanks, Matt and Roland, for the presentation. I think a lot of my questions have been asked, both to staff, which I'm not sure I got the answer I wanted, and to the applicant, just in terms of some of the details. So I don't have any further questions.
Okay, Hoda, you're with us. Any
Hi,
questions?
no, for me also, all my questions have been asked. Thank you for the presentation.
Okay. And finally, I don't have any other questions now. So we're going to close the Q&A session and move on to comments. So each panel member has a chance now to provide feedback, and we're going to start with Dana.
Yeah, thanks everybody. When I reviewed this proposal initially, I found it very architecturally interesting, which I think is a good thing. I really appreciated the simplicity and the legibility of design. I looked at it from a tall building perspective, and I appreciated your response to tower separation, both on-site and off-site, and staggering the towers to mitigate overlook, but also varying the height, which is great. They're both oriented in the same direction, but given that you have the interior space that's cut out, I don't think there'd be that ability to change that orientation. And the floor plate size is well within a good range. So I was happy to see that response to good tower design and good tall building design for the area. Part of my reasoning for asking staff about the context was to get an idea whether this is, something that's going to be the first in the planned kind of function of the area, or is this just, one project within a greater contextual area that's mainly low rise? And I don't think even the city staff is necessarily sure of that at this time. But what I did note is it is on arterials. It is within a greater community. It is close to transit. And it doesn't have, too many mitigating factors at this point in terms of shadows that would, have any impact on the surrounding area. So I guess when I think of how it fits in with the context, I think, generally, I'd be kind of supportive of this kind of heightened density at this area, given that, we do need housing, and, this is setback enough from surrounding low-rise uses. So I guess from my perspective, I would, see this as something that you could look at refining some of the details of the amenity space and really looking at how it fits into that greater context and work on some of the design details. Um, I do encourage you to look at a greater mix of unit types, specifically with more family units, as this appears to be kind of a family neighborhood, and you want to invite kind of more people and the diversity of people with different needs and unit sizes and scales as you move forward. I think that would also be very palatable to the local community as well. And lastly, just in terms of details, I noticed you had bike parking in front of or just near the access bay for the vehicular access. And I just think it would be better suited in terms of in front of some of the retail uses or in front of some of the residential uses, so had better visibility. So just some of those things and really focusing on, a strong response to the podium. You have nice wide landscaping strips there and just making sure you have a lot of trees and vegetation to provide a really nice and solid base design would be my comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Dana. Joey?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I'll align with Dana's comments in terms of the overall massing and planning for the building, and also with the understanding that this is something that the city wants to see in this neighborhood. I would also be supportive of the project. I also think that if this is going to be a project that is precedent setting and other types of projects can occur in the area, I think that this will serve as a good example if the final built product is executed as the renderings show it. I think from the perspective of heritage, which could, I don't know if it's already become complicated, but there is a very historically significant national cultural heritage site to the east of the property, and then there is also a listed cultural landscape on the other side of it. So what would come up as sort of criticism to that is that this project would serve as a visual obstruction, and also there would be shadow impacts and wind impacts. I don't see major shadow impacts when it comes to impacting both properties. And obviously there's going to be visual impacts, but that comes with the nature of the project. But I also think that that Roland and his team have paid attention to that with the buffering, the landscape buffering on the east side, and also with the attempt to engage with the cemetery through the courtyard condition. So I think there is very good attempts to do that, and I commend that approach. That's it for me.
Thanks, Joey. Ted?
So I'm a bit conflicted because I'm really drawn to what I think is a very skillful design solution, but it's also a bit shocking the significant density that's being proposed in this context, and so it makes it a little challenging to assess its success without knowing what's to follow in a more confident way. Having said that, I think it's a really simple and bold and compelling design solution, and it's refreshing to see this kind of restraint and a design that's intrinsic to the massing versus other ways of creating design quality. This one seems to be very powerful, and I think the relationship of the two towers, I think, is quite convincing and unique, and I would create a strong landmark and character and presence in this location. The architecture, to me, I see a lot of Stephen Hall, early Stephen Hall, David Chipperfield, his current work in terms of the kind of very fine, classicist modern facade and screen that plays with the idea of frontage versus sides and soft interiors. The parking and the movement on site makes sense. It is, it seems like the podium is matching the tallest buildings in this vicinity. And I don't see anything around 20 stories nearby or being proposed. So that, I think is conflicting. The project also takes up the entire site, so there's no space for public use within that property space, or no real setbacks within it, significant setbacks. It fully maximizes its full site density. So for that, I think then the payback on in the public realm needs to be a great quality public realm space, great quality of architectural detailing and material, I would think. If we can just talk about the landscape, the site receives great benefit from both the adjacent green spaces of the cemetery and the National Historic Site. But I think there's a question of what it's giving back. 30 of the 32 trees on this site are being removed. Is there landscape and tree canopies that are being replaced in a meaningful way on this site? I'd really like to see the amenities plans for the amenity spaces up top. It would be great to see landscape, some significant landscape up top, and I appreciate that there's a cost that comes with that to create planters at upper levels, but trees on those corners, I think that podium could be a great place to showcase and extend the green of this site and the escarpment to the upper levels, both from an amenity perspective, but also from a street and a biophilic response to the site. I think we have to imagine that Centennial Parkway will, to the south, possibly on both sides, become more dense, and that people will be walking from those sites to the intersection. And there's a big landscape offset to Centennial Parkway. And I noticed as you move north, it becomes more of a boulevard condition where the sidewalk is set back from the street. I think right now the sidewalk's being proposed on this arterial road, which I think is pretty uncomfortable. I think there's an opportunity for 2 rows of trees on this flank that we're looking at to Centennial Parkway, with a pathway that threads between them and actually creates a much nicer quality amenity space for pedestrians and for walkability on the site, and also offers the townhouses some space. I think that the landscape is at this point is undercooked, and maybe that's just the stage of development, but I see this L shape of green having should have far greater community amenity and public realm amenity, particularly at the corner and along Centennial Parkway. I think the way the units are disposed at grade, I think is great. Townhouses, corner entrances, retail, amenity space, I think all the right moves at grade. I'm wondering though, from an architectural perspective, some of the precedents showed double height knockouts of the brick grid to create a greater sense of scale and variety at grade. Is that something that could be looked at? I wouldn't want to take away from the boldness of the design, but I think there are subtle ways in the next stages of development to look at how you can differentiate the ground plane to make the scale a little more varied. And I guess my last comment would be, just returning to the density, I think it is really dense and large. Could it have a lower podium? Could it have lower heights? I think so, and still be very successful on this site. I guess that's a question for the planning department to consider. It does feel very large on this site. And then finally, I'd echo the comments about the programming. I think the quality of the amenity spaces, the quality of the public realm, and the quality of the details are going to make this either a great new addition to the city fabric, And I think you want to have a quality of mix types in there so that there's some diversity and variety of use and people who can use this space to make it truly successful from a programming point of view. So those are my thoughts. Thank you very much for the presentation and for a very skillful design solution.
Thanks, Ted. Over to Eldon.
Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you for the presentation. I'm very much in agreement with my previous panel members in terms of the sentiment shared. So I won't repeat too much. What I will say is in I don't think that this is too dense. And in the vacuum of not being able to have direction as to what the planned function of the direction is going, I have to conclude that on a site that's separated from low density residential and is at an intersection and is, about a 10-minute walk to future higher transit, this is likely feasible. So I share a lot of those same comments. Some of the concerns I had, which were shared with some of the questions, relate to what that interim condition is between phase 1 and phase 2 and how you treat that podium facade that's going to be exposed for who knows how long. I think part of the submission or part of the plan should include an interim facade treatment that speaks to that component. I think while I appreciate the precast veneer and its treatment along the facade, which I think is a great addition, I'm wondering if that facade needs to extend all the way into and continue to the tower. I get the sense that it emphasizes height in a way that probably is problematic as it relates to whether this proposal is dense, whether this proposal is too dense in its location. I'm wondering if that facade stopped at the podium or just slightly above the podium, or perhaps was a little less, or perhaps had a more open treatment above the podium level. It wouldn't emphasize the verticality of the proposal. It may kind of soften, I guess, its view within the skyline. Something to consider. And I think those are really the points that I wanted to share on that. Oh, sorry, I missed the last point. In terms of the facade facing the cemetery itself, while it is a private, area, thinking that it's an area of reflection, it almost functions as a secondary frontage to this building. So considering that relationship and considering that facade, I think just a little more attention should be given, particularly as it relates to where cars are screened and the above story components of that facade, just to ensure that relationship to this, sensitive use and sensitive space, the space of reflection, isn't interrupted by, the views of vehicles moving or the components like that, that it still reads as a frontage that respects that relationship to the adjacent use. Other than that, I think it is overall this could be a very successful proposal, and good luck.
Thanks, Eldon. Hoda, comments?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you again for the presentation. I really think that this project is well designed, and I appreciate the effort that has been placed to have the nice streetscape, having the retails, and not exposing the parkings along the street, and keep the parkings underground. And in general, for density, I think at long term should be fine. And because it's the first one, it looks weirder like now. But the thing is that at long term, if other development happens around around this neighborhood, so the population will be bigger. So I really I'd like to echo my colleague Ted about the public space and the green space on ground level, because in the near future, more development is happening and even more people are coming. And I think I really encourage to try to have more green spaces on ground level, as I see these big towers and a big block that is working like a barrier between two green spaces. And not only for the pedestrian connection, that it needs to have more pedestrian access on the ground level, but also for the green spaces to, I really encourage to have them to bold pollinators, green corridors between the two green spaces at two sides. So for that, first of all, the best would be having the green space in the ground level, and the second one would be having the high quality green space on the amenities above the ground at fourth level and seventh level. So it's not only the amenities for the residents, but also having as much as possible green spaces to connect these two existing valuable green spaces. And those are my comments, and we really like my other colleagues, we appreciate all the design, and we can't wait to see this project to have the best quality as possible future. Thank you.
Thanks, Hoda. We're running a little bit over time here, so I'll just add a quick comment in summary. And I think our panel members are divided here on density, because I think I'm hearing, and my own feelings, a bit of trepidation, because we understand that this is a precedent-setting project, that nothing is this high in this neighborhood, and if this is approved, then there could be this and higher, and where does that happen, and how does it happen reasonably? So there's a responsibility here to think about density very carefully. When I first saw this project, I was a little shocked at how much was being proposed for the site. I think it, as Ted suggested, I think it could be, the podium could be one floor lower, and the towers could be a couple floors lower. But again, the execution of the design is really, really nicely done. Its clarity in logic and its simplicity and restraint are very, very much appreciated. I also echo the comments earlier about providing more diversity and diversity in unit types to allow more families to live there. But overall, a lot of support for the design intent behind this project. So at this point, we are a bit over time, but Roland and Matt, if you have any comments in feedback to the panelists' comments?
Not from us, or I think all the comments are very well taken. We're glad that everybody seemed to like the architectural expression that was used here, and we'll take some of the comments about the at-grade condition, and I'm sure we'll hear from the planners about the density issue. Thanks very much for that.
Thanks to all panel members for the great feedback. Lots of good comments for us to take back to the project team and consider, and we look forward to to doing just that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. At this point, we can adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your comments. Bye-bye.